everybody into this session. And with us now we have, or presenting now, we have Joyce Seitzinger. Many of you will know Joyce probably from a range of different things that she does, but Joyce now works with Academic Tribe, her company, and they actually won the sponsors of the Mini Moot. So please do ask Joyce about their services and visit their website. I'll let Joyce plug that later or during a session. But for now, I just want to thank Joyce for her time and looking forward to a great session. Over to you.
All right, thanks, Shane. I don't know how many of you were in here just a few minutes ago when Shane and I were talking, and I was admitting that I'm still very jet lagged from coming back from South Africa. So even though it's 9 o'clock in the morning for me here in Melbourne, and this should be a prime time for me to be presenting, I'm actually feeling really fuzzy. So I'm going to try to do my best. And feel free, any of you, to follow up with me on Twitter or in the forums as well. If you've got any follow-up questions, or I'm not making things clear. So thanks, Shane, and thanks again, amazing Pukunui team for setting up another wonderful event. I really like this idea of having a 24-hour event, just 24 hours of pure learning and pure sharing. So I'm going to be talking about something that we've been working on with Academic Tribe, which is learner experience design. And what I'd like to share with all of you is one particular technique that we've been using that I think people who are, and I'm just looking at the names and the people that I know that are in here, and I can see that there's quite a few people who, like me, are learning designers. So I've picked out one particular tool that I think that some of you might find useful in your day-to-day practice. But feel free to ask me more about learner experience design. And we've also got a blog that you can follow up with. Okay, so how have I come to this thing around learner experience design? So a few weeks ago, I was at the conference, which is why I'm jet lagged. I was at this conference in South Africa where people were talking about some of the wicked problems that we have in education, and one of the biggest problems that for those of you who don't know me, I work mostly in tertiary education. And I've worked both in New Zealand and in Australia in higher education organizations. And now with Academic Tribe, we work mostly with universities as well. But one of the biggest problems that came across in that conference was this idea that what is the role of educational institutions when we live in this world where there is just ubiquitous access to information? What becomes our role? And this was kind of an ongoing theme that people were talking about. You know, what do we do when really we should move beyond this idea of the LMS? And this was something that also is something that people kept referring to, using the LMS as a paywall, using the LMS as basically a way to create a wall of location for your information. And if that isn't what the role is of education, then what really should it be? And sorry, I'm just having some technical issues here. Am I still there? You guys still hearing me? Yep. Okay. Good. Thanks. So then, what does our role really become? And as I was thinking through that, I thought, well, then I think our role really is to create experiences. And unfortunately, we don't seem to do that very well. So my experience in having been having worked in educational institutions is that my role quite often, and the way that we kind of went about course design, is that quite often it did come down to just uploading the basic information into the system, despite the fact that it can actually do a lot more. And I was getting quite frustrated with that. And actually started to think about, leaving education altogether. And as I started to do that, I started to go and, I began hanging out here in Melbourne with the startup community and becoming exposed to people who were doing a lot of work around software development and setting up companies, product development, service development. And I became exposed to these new ways of doing things through user experience design. and started to become really, really interested in that. So let me just. And one of the things that I started to learn as I started to learn about this experience design was the fact that we actually tend to not focus on that very much when we look at how we design our courses. So when you think about all of the tools that we use and all the platforms that we use, but also how we do learning design, I think very rarely do we actually come across to the top of this pyramid. So I'll just explain a little bit about this pyramid here. This is Andrew's customer experience hierarchy. And it basically takes you through from a focus on tasks to where you can, where your platform is actually helping people do functional things so you can actually get things done. Where it is reliable, so your platform is available and accurate. Where it is usable, it can be used without difficulty. And this is where I often think we kind of get to. We can use the LMS, we can use the online courses, because this goes beyond the LMS. This isn't just about Moodle. This is actually about, you know, the resources that we put in there, the way that everything works together, the way that it's been designed to coordinate across from lectures to tutorials to the online course set, how it all fits together. I quite often think that we actually kind of tend to get stuck around this usable level. The next level is the convenient level, where it's easy to use and it works like we think. And I think very rarely do we actually move beyond that when we look at the courses that we design. And how often do we really feel like we've focused on an experience and we've been able to actually create something meaningful that has a personal significance? So I think that despite the fact that we've had these LMSs in our institutions for quite a while, there's been a risk that we've started to use them in the same way that we've used PowerPoint, which is that you can do lots of different things with PowerPoint, but because it has this convenient way of setting things up, with the bullet points and the headings, etc., that's then how you get stuck in using it. And I think in a way, that's quite often what has happened with the way that we've been using the LMSs as well. So what is experience design? Well, if you once you start to look at experience design, one of the nice things is that a lot of people that work in experience design come from a graphic design background, and so there's lots of great diagrams that you can go and find. In fact we've set up a Pinterest board just to start collecting all of those, and so once you start looking at it, you'll find great diagrams that explain what experience design is, like this one. And in fact, this is even though it's very pretty, it's actually not a very helpful diagram. So what I've just done is I've actually given you a very bad learner experience. So let's break it down a little bit by starting back with the father of design, Don Norman. He says, the world is complex, and so too must be the activities that we perform, but it doesn't mean that we must live in continual frustration. And I think that's a really key point. It doesn't mean that we must live in continual frustration. What appears to be a complicated tool should also be one that fits the task, that is understandable, that is usable, and that is enjoyable. So then looking at what is an experience actually. Experience emerges from the intertwined works of perception, action, motivation, emotion, and cognition in dialogue with the world, place, time, people, and objects. It is crucial to view experience as the consequence of many different systems. And I think you can already start to see how this actually ties into the work that we do. Quite often, we are trying to manipulate lots of different elements and lots of different systems in order to design a learner experience for the learners. So what then is user experience design? The first requirement for an exemplary user experience is to meet the exact needs of the customer without fuss or bother. So what you want to do with user experience design is you want to create something that is easy to use, that is usable, and it must be a seamless merging of the services of multiple disciplines. One of the other related design disciplines that I've been looking at is interaction design. which is overlapping. And what you'll find is that as you start to look into this more, is that actually all of these design disciplines do overlap with each other, and they've all got slightly different focuses. So in interaction design, which is often abbreviated to IXD, we talk about the practice of designing interactive digital products, environments, systems, and services. Sometimes it gets very focused on just that digital product, but some people do expand that definition to actually encompass also things like interacting with, for instance, for us, it would be like a physical guide or maybe a job aid, etc. And then one of the really interesting ones, I think, is a different design discipline is service design, which is the intentional and thoughtful design of internal and customer-facing activities needed to deliver a service. So sometimes people differentiate between user experience design and service design, as user experience being really focused on just the experience of the user. So for us, that would be the learner. And service design also being focused on what the experience is of the staff who are delivering the service. So in that case, for us, that would be the educators, the librarians, and the learning designers who are working on it as well. So I think service design is another way that we can start to, another discipline that we can start to pick from when we think about how we do our learning design. And I think that what is important is that in all of this, no matter which ones of these design disciplines you start to look at, what it always comes back to is that they really focus on empathy for the user. And it's something, when I came across this, that's something that really resonated with me. And I thought, you know, despite the fact that we often say that we are learner-centered, I actually find that this empathy for the user tends to get lost somewhere in between the pressures, in between the deadlines, in between you know, the need to meet learning outcomes, to meet all of the compliance issues as well. The empathy for the user sometimes get lost. And when you think about empathy, it's so Mark Hassan-Sahl, who's written a book about experience design, says that feelings are integral to experiences, and they may even be at its core, and they are inextricably intertwined with our actions. But I've been reading a wonderful book by Indy Young called Practical Empathy, and she kind of distinguishes between empathy and empathizing. And she says empathy is a noun, it's a thing. It is an understanding that you develop about another person. And empathizing is then the use of that understanding in action. So you have to build empathy first, and that's built through the willingness to take time to discover the deep down thoughts and reactions that make another person tick. And then you set out to understand their cognitive and emotional states. Once you have empathy, it gives you the ability to try on that person's perspective. So to think as they might in a given scenario. And then you are able to actually apply that empathy and empathize with them. So I think it's a really wonderful concept, and I think there's a lot of work that we can do in order to build that empathy back into our learning designs. So empathy for the user is one of the things that all of those design disciplines have in common. And then the other thing that they all have in common is that they have very specific, repeatable, reusable methodologies that you can actually use in order to get the work done. And they are things that we can adopt into our practice. And it's been so exciting this last year to be working on this, because it doesn't matter how much I read about service design, user experience design, etc. Everything that people have been doing to develop to design really complex, sorry, I have to approach this in a different way. Everything that I've been reading and everything that I've been seeing about how people are developing these really complex softwares, really complex systems, or really complex services, all of it can be adopted in the work that we do. I haven't come across anything yet where I think, oh, you know, this wouldn't really work in our environment. It wouldn't really work in educational design. There's a lot of work there, and I think it's a really rich vein for us to mine. And one of the things that I found is that very rarely will people immediately start building things. So there's always this design that happens up front before people actually start building things. And it's something, and it was very gratifying for me to find, because this is something that I've been saying in the work that I've done with lecturers, for the last, and subject matter experts for the last 16 years, which is, don't design inside your system. Step away from your LMS, step away from Moodle, and design away from it. And then you can do rapid prototyping. Then you can start quickly building little blocks and testing them, but don't design inside your environment. So I've been exploring whether there's potential for learner experience design, or for us to actually, come up with our own design discipline and start thinking about this idea of learner experience design. And it hasn't just been me. One of my main co-conspirators is Dr. Jess Nutt. In fact, she and I presented at the previous iMoot, which was back in July. I'm going to say July. And I've started to, so with Academic Tribe, we've been doing quite a bit of work together with one of the Australian universities here in Melbourne, RMIT University, who have been really open to us starting to use some of these new techniques with them in the work that we've been doing with them. And so I'll just run through a few of them quite quickly, and then I'll get into the learner journey mapping a little bit more. So this is one of the techniques that we started to use, was this technique of card sorting, which is usually something that you do in order to develop an information architecture for, like, if you're developing a website. And what we did, what the problem was with this was that they had an LMS program site that had just become this really big muddle, and what the request that the teaching team came to us with was, can you please sort this out? And if we had done exactly that, if we hadn't taken a design approach to it, then we would have just said, sure, we can go in and do that. We would have gone behind the scenes, rearranged all of the information in the folders, and just done it. Instead, what we did is we said, all right, let's look at the users. What is the exact problem that they're actually doing? Let's do some user research. And this is where we use the card sorting. So what we did is we actually created a little card for each element that we could find on their program site. And then we asked them to give us access to some of their users, and we ended up doing, just very quick and dirty. We had a 1 hour intervention with 3 teachers and with 2 students, so 5 hours in total. And what we would get them to do is to actually sort and put in order how they would group the different elements. And remember, all of these elements actually came from their actual program site. And then what we do, we went in with 2 UX or LX designers, as I like to think of us, and we went in and and one of us would actually transcribe what was being said, while the other one actually worked with the user and did the facilitation of the session. And so we asked them to talk out loud as they were putting things down. And what we found was that the actual card sorting exercise basically fell flat. And the reason for that was that that nobody actually knew what any of these elements were. And so as we were recording and transcribing everything that they were saying, what we were finding out was that people were very confused about the terminology. People were using different terminology. People weren't really understanding why some elements were there. They were making comments like, oh, well, I suppose we're supposed to do something with this, but to be honest, I've never really clicked on it. So what we were finding out was that people didn't really have a joint digital practice. So one of the other things that we got them to do at the end of that hour was to sketch for us what they would like the homepage for that program site to look like. And again, we got them to verbalize as they were sketching. So this was like a 3 or 4 minute exercise. Just sketch for us what you would like this site to look like. Not right now, like not at the point where the student comes in and it's got like a welcome message up. But what if it was like 3 months into the course? What would you like this program site to look like? And what was really interesting is that people actually have very, a strong convictions about what it would look like. And in what they were doing there, in that aspirational piece, all of a sudden they were much clearer in the experience that they wanted to deliver. So what we found before is that in previous interactions with them is that they would immediately log on, and then they would say, oh, I'd like to move this here, and I'd like to move that there. And they were very much locked in by the experience that they had already created for their learners and that they had already created for their staff. In fact, what we found now was that all of a sudden, by not having the site there, they were able to think much more strongly, by not having the LMS right there. They were able to think much more strongly and have and much more widely about the kind of experience that they actually wanted to create for their students. What we then did is we coded all of the conversations, and that means finding out all of the interesting tidbits that people said, and we grouped them all. It was quite a bit of work, and we found out that really the biggest problem was that people didn't really have a joint understanding of their digital practice. So everyone was kind of confused about why they actually had this program site, and there wasn't a generic agreement among the team, even in terms of terminology. Sometimes people refer to assignments as assessments, sometimes they were tasks, sometimes they were projects, etc. So what we were finding was that if we had just taken this on and we hadn't done any user research, we wouldn't have been solving the actual problem. And so instead, what we've been able to do by actually taking this design approach and doing the research first and talking to the users, including the students, by doing that, we're now actually addressing the actual problem that was there. One of the other design approaches that we've been using is this idea of having personas, of building personas as we work on projects. And this was something that the team was already doing before we got there, and I think it's something that I increasingly hear other learning designers do as well. I'm finding the personas really, really helpful. So a persona is basically an archetype of your user. It isn't a specific user, but they are user models, basically, and they allow you as a designer to predict how a user will act and think and why they want to accomplish a task. And so you really have to think of them as composite archetypes. They're not based on real persons. They might be slightly exaggerated, in fact, but ideally you would base them on factual data. So your learning analytics or any kind of demographics that you can find out can be really, really helpful in creating personas. And I would say create like 3 or 4 different personas, and give them a name. If you want, Google some reusable images and give them a face as well. Because what I've found is that the personas you can just use over and over again. You can continue to use them, and they work a lot better than in design discussions when you're working with a team, when you're working with the lecturers, when you're working with your subject matter experts. Not having to say, oh, but we found that 40% of students are accessing the course from a mobile device. It helps if you can just say, but remember Lindy? Remember how she's always doing all of the studying on her mobile device? You see, it's a different kind of conversation that you have, because you're immediately conjuring up this actual person, and everybody understands who that actual person is. So yes, Lindy, I was thinking of you. So the personas are another really useful methodology to adopt, and there's lots of information that you can find out on the web about that. I actually included I forgot that I'd actually included an example, but this is one of the examples that we've used for an open course. It is most definitely not a MOOC. We have decided it is just an open course which is around creative research practice for architects. And so this is one of the personas that we created there. And I found this, even just doing this exercise, setting up the personas together with the teaching team was really, really helpful, because what it turned out was that people tend to have little mini me's in their head that they are designing for. Everyone seems to be designing for a younger version of themselves, of what they were like as a student. And so even just facilitating that conversation and having that conversation with the 5 lecturers was really edifying, because it turned out that they all thought of the prototypical student as someone very different. So having that discussion with them was incredibly valuable. And so that brings me to the journey mapping, which is the other approach that we've been using, and the one that I've been really excited about, because I've just found that it is so useful, particularly in so people quite often are looking for like the silver bullet when you're working in education technology, and people are always waiting for like, oh, this, and then platforms and tools come out and people all jump on them, or approaches like MOOCs, and people all jump on them as, this is going to be the next big thing, and this is going to be the next big thing. I think the thing that's been really interesting for me with experience design is that it isn't so much about designing the next big thing. Quite often it is actually about just iterations, just iterating towards a better product and a better service. And it doesn't mean throwing overboard everything that we've already built. It doesn't mean throwing overboard all of the online course sites that we've already got, but it's about saying, what are we doing here, mapping it out, and then, well, which bit of this can we make an improvement in right now? And I think also, if you're in a learning design team, I know from my time in New Zealand and also here in Australia, is that quite often as a central learning design team, you can be really stretched and you're working on lots of different projects and you've only got so much time. So you haven't always got time to do a complete revamp and a complete reboot of a course, but sometimes you do have time to just make one difference. And that's really the work that we've been doing. Just tell me the one best practice. Yeah, exactly. But that's really what are the express projects that we've been working on with RMIT have all been about as well. It is really about just working with someone very closely, one lecturer or just a small lecturing team, maybe 2 or 3 people, and within 4 to 6 weeks, turning it around, picking one aspect of the course and just iterating that and making a difference. And this is where we've been using the journey mapping. So, why are you not? There we go. So what is journey mapping? What you see here is and I've included the link there if you wanted to follow up and see if you want to copy and paste it and see the larger version of this. But what you see here is a typical journey map from a Keeping Graduates Green project, which was done in the States, and what this project was about, it was about enrolling people in taking on more sustainable actions, getting people to enroll to sign up to the project, to commit to making changes in their green practices, and then to track that and see what they were actually doing, and then round off that service at some point. And so what you see, and I'm afraid it might be a little bit too small to see on this slide, but basically what you see is that the yellow pathway is really what the intended target user does. And then all of the other pathways are what will happen with the system. So the first one is, I think, if I remember correctly, it is around the comms channel. How are people going to find out about it? How do they then sign up? What are the messages that the user is actually getting? And then there is a whole pathway that is really about what is happening at the same time in the front channel. And then there is a whole thing about in the front end. And then the green bit is about and what's happening at the back end at the same time. And so what that helps is that actually the journey map here actually helps you map all of the component parts and all of the component actions that are happening as part of that whole service. And I think so often what we are doing when we design a course is that we are actually designing a really complex service. And so this kind of service design thinking can be really, really useful for us to actually map out all of these different moving parts. You know, there's things that are happening in the course side, there are things that are happening in the lectures, and there's things that are happening in tutorials. I will honestly admit that for 99% of the higher ed courses that I've worked on, I've never even gone and sat in one of the tutorials, or gone and sat in one of the tutorials, or gone and sat in one of the lectures. Because generally, I would be brought in to help us out with the online side. You have to help us out with Moodle. And so those other parts don't really come into it. And yet you can create so much more of a cohesive experience, because remember, the person at the center of that experience, to them, it doesn't matter. It's all part of their learner experience. So I think starting to use this journey mapping can be really, really powerful in actually helping us design across all of those different gaps. So journey maps can take different forms. So this is just another example that I've included. These aren't learner journey maps. These are just journey maps from service design. So you can do them in any way, and that can actually be, you know, co-designing them with the team that you are working with can actually be really helpful as well, because it really helps people to kind of buy into the project, and it becomes a joint project rather than just becoming this kind of quite clinical site. And so if you're going to do learner journey mapping, how do you get started? What you want to do, there's certain components that have to come back into your learner journey map. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to map the learner path and all of the touch points that the learner is going to have. So when are they going to interact with your service or product, or both? What are the different actions that they take? And then what you want to do is you also want to map the paths and touch points of other stakeholders or channels, right? So if the first one was the learner, then for instance, the second path can be, well, what does the lecturer actually do? The third path could be, what does the tutor actually do? The fourth path could be, well, what are the components of the online course site that people are going to be interacting with? And then what you want to do is you want to kind of identify what the different interaction phases are, because despite the fact that quite often we set up our courses in a, you know, here's weeks 1 through 14, there are actually distinct phases. I think quite common now is to include in the first, you know, 2 weeks some sort of introduction, because we all realize that the first 2 weeks are actually introduction. It's a getting to know you, it's getting to know the course. So we're going to design those kinds of activities. Then we get into the body of it. Then we move into a phase where the students are actually going to be preparing for an assessment, etc. So what you want to do is you actually want to map those different kind of phases across your learner journey. And then what you want to do is you want to identify the emotions. You want to see how people are experiencing the different touch points. And you want to hide, so you can do this through various different things, right? So you can do it from your learning analytics. Based on your learning analytics, what are people liking, what aren't they liking? What are they clicking on, what aren't they clicking on? Which discussions are they participating in, which ones aren't they participating in? But you can also be quite direct. You know, you can run polls in order to find out. You can do brief user interviews. You can just ask people. And what you want to do is you want to find out you want to bring in the emotions of the learner, because it's all about designing for empathy, right? You want to design for empathy. You have this empathy for the learner, and you want to, you want to give them a good experience. And so what you want to do is you want to kind of identify emotions, and particularly identify points where people are not happy, or people are really getting stressed out, or just having a poor experience, or getting confused. And then from that, you can then start to identify opportunities and barriers. And it can be really helpful to actually map those or put those inside your learner journey map as well. Because what you want to do is you want to keep it as a living document. You want to keep it as something that gives everybody who's involved in the design and delivery of that course or that experience, you want to give all of them the same thing to aspire to. And so not putting those opportunities and barriers somewhere else actually gives you everything in one overview and gives you one artifact that everybody agrees on, that is what we are building towards. So what you want to do is just include that in your learner journey map. So when would you use journey mapping? You can use it for an existing product, object, or service to just start to map out what you've actually already got and map all the touch points, identify the emotions, and identify the pain points. You can use it for a new product, and this is where you really want to get a common understanding of the experience that everyone is aspiring to build. And again, you want to identify the touch points, you want to identify the channels that you're building, and you also want to identify priorities for the development, because we can't always get the perfect course. I don't think any of us have ever put the perfect course online straight away, right? Quite often you start from an MVP, a minimum viable product, and you get that up, and then slowly but surely you start to iterate and to make it better. But if you are quite clear on what all of the different touch points and different channels are, then you can say, oh, this is the one where we can really make a big difference in the learner experience. So let's prioritize that. You know, maybe we can't do videos for all 14 weeks, but maybe we can at least start with a really good video around this one problem that we know students already have. So you can start to identify priorities. And you can use it instead of a prototype. So when a prototype is too expensive to build, what you can do is you can just use the journey map as a prototype, map out what it is that you want to build, and then it gives the team something to shoot at. It gives the team something to actually be looking at and to be talking about, rather than having already built quite a lot of things online. And why would you use it? Well, basically to map all of the bricks in your bricolage. What are all those different touch points and how they, you know, and you want to include even the ones that are beyond your control. How are students going to use library resources, etc. You can use it to step away from your medium, so not designing inside your platforms, to design across the gaps, like I was saying earlier about, you know, tutorials versus online course site versus the lectures. How do they all work together to facilitate a conversation and to facilitate collaboration? And that just comes back to that designing across the gaps, because I really do think that it's a very important piece that it can help with. Now, you know, when you go online, you will find some really high-end learner journey maps, but you can do it really, really easy, and you can start with some, you know, some very basic supplies that you've probably got lying around your office anyway. You can do it on a wall. If you've got a place that you can actually kind of dedicate to a project and where you can keep things up, that is really helpful. But I realize that most of us tend to move around our institutions quite a bit, and so you might not be able to do that. But if you've got it, for instance, the ability to actually have some walls dedicated to larger projects inside your design office, that is really great. But if you haven't, then even just having like a shared Google Doc and just having a Google Sheets, you know, an Excel spreadsheet up there, that can actually help you as well. It doesn't have to be that advanced. So what we did for our learner journey map, which I'll just show off just to close off, is we work together. So there's me and Mark from Academic Tribe, and then we work with two of the lecturers, Annette Pook and Nicola Hardy. They were from the graphic design VET programs, and also the digital learning team in the School of Design and College of Design and Social Context at RMIT University. And what we did is we did some user research in an initial 3-hour mapping session. So what you see on this picture is actually a traditional course map, which has got weeks 1 through 14 already kind of pre-mapped out. But as we got sat down with the lecturers, what we discovered was that they actually their problem wasn't the entire 14 weeks, but they were having one specific problem, which is that they've got about thanks Shane, which is they've had one specific problem, which is that they had about 120 students who all need to go on a 2-week work placement, and that their problem was how were they going to find these workplaces for the students, and they had methods that were helping them do that already. So what we decided to do, we decided to map out exactly how they were going about that already. So what you see here is the pink post-its is the learner path. It is what the students actually had to do. The yellow post-its were all of the actions or touch points that the teachers had in that process. And then the blue post-its that you see at the bottom were what the industry mentors actually had to do. And so what we found was that they have involvement straight from the beginning all the way through to the end. And what we found as we were doing this process as well was that, and if you're going to do this, just a tip, what you don't see here is just off to the left, there were a whole bunch of hot pink post-its as well, because as we were discussing every single step and really getting into the detail of all of these things, it was that lots of ideas were popping up for maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. And we didn't want to map those inside the learning pathway, because what we really wanted to do was actually map what was happening, but we also didn't want to lose it. So it's a really good idea to have a space kind of off to one side where you can capture these kind of blue sky thinking and ideas as they happen. So what we did is we did this in a 3-hour mapping session, mapped out all of the touch points and all of the actions that people were taking. And then we moved it all into just a shared spreadsheet and started to work on it a little bit more. And already we were finding out that that we were adding things, that we were getting more specific about things. And then what you then want to do is you want to find a really talented graphic designer and you want to work with them, because what we found was that in working with our graphic designer, not only did she help us make it look a whole lot better, which is of course the initial thing that you think about, but in working with her, she was also finding connections and questioning things that we had written down and actually helping us improve the experience and saying, you've written all these things down. So for instance, she was responsible for actually adding that purple pathway that you see there, which is all around the channels, and mapping out what the different tools and platforms were that we were using throughout this. And what we were finding was that things were moving between different tools and platforms quite a bit. And so anything we could do there to improve things would be really helpful. And then what we did at the bottom is we actually, in this case, we only mapped the kind of the pain points. So we didn't really go through and ask, try to discover and map all of the positive experiences. So this one is very basic map, really just trying to identify the pain points and then finding the ones that we could address most easily. Remember, these are just 4 to 6 week turnaround projects. And what we found, so here's just a little bit of detail so that you can see. So this is, for example, just showing the relationship between the different activities that everybody takes, between the teacher activity and the industry mentor, for instance. And so what we were finding was that this was actually one of the biggest stumbling blocks, which is that there was a lot of email traffic, and this was really causing a lot of stress for the teacher, who was feeling really overwhelmed. And then, of course, what you then find is that that then has a knock-on effect on the total learner experience. So anything we could do there to alleviate that would be really good. And that is, in fact, what we have been working on as well. So what we've decided is we wanted to address the pain points. We wanted to really cut back on all of that email traffic that was happening. And so what we need to do is we need to set up a website, just a simple WordPress site that has all of the information for the industry mentors on it. And we want to cut back also and get some efficiencies in terms of how they manage all of the email communications with the industry mentors. And so setting up a MailChimp, and then also doing the feedback with the industry mentors in a way that didn't require quite so much back and forth. So we've been looking at using Typeform. And so those seem like really small changes, and they are, but small changes are fine. And if you want another example of that, I can recommend that you take a look at what Mike Wesch did with his syllabus. So what he was finding was that the traditional syllabus that he was handing out at the beginning of the year really wasn't a great learner experience for his learners, because it was pretty boring and just had all of the learning outcomes and then, content mapped against that. And if you're thinking about empathy and if you're thinking about emotional response, you're not getting, you don't get excited about that. It's functional, yes. It's usable, also, yes. But is it an experience? Not really. And so what he decided to do is he decided to just annotate it, right? And he started to just tell people, yes, we're reading these things and they are course coded and et cetera, and they've got learning outcomes mapped against them. But why are we doing it? And we're doing it because people are different, and these differences represent a vast range of human potential. So of course, then he took it to the next level, and he also created like a 10-minute, motivational video around it. But what the reason that I really liked it is because this is something that anybody can do, and so even small changes can really make a difference and can make an incremental difference in the learner experiences that we are giving. So what will it take to adopt learner experience design practices? Well, I think we're going to have to expand our toolkits, but like I said, there are people in other industries that have been doing a tremendous amount of work around user experience design, around service design thinking, and we can just steal like an artist and start using it in our own work. I think it's going to take different ways of collaborating. I think we're going to have to work in different teams, maybe, and maybe divide responsibilities up, and have the responsibilities actually flow across a team rather than being quite so divided up. This is a picture that Jess actually sent me from her team. So Jess is at Michigan State University, and where she is the learning design manager. And this is their work team. And when she posted this, it actually made me think about a writer's room, right? Where you're all in the same room together, you're knocking around a product, you're working on the next episode and on future episodes, and you're all trying to come together and everybody's contributing to the team. I actually really like that idea. And I think certainly we've all, yes, MSU. And certainly when I've worked with teams where we've done the best work, it has been in that kind of way, even though we weren't very purposeful about it. When we got to that stage, that's when we did the most creative work. And what we found is that even when you can't get everyone in a room, because that's just not how our institutions are set up, et cetera, that there are different ways and online ways of actually starting to collaborate together in that way. So we've used Trello. We have a Slack that we use. So Trello for task tracking. We have a Slack for ongoing communications. We have Google Drive so that we can all share documents together. And we've also used a Peer-in, which is an open source conferencing or calling platform. But I think what it really requires is for all of us to really commit that it is around learner experience, that what we want to do is we want to, improve that learner experience and be constantly working towards a better learner. We are working towards experience. I think what also needs to happen is that we need to expand on learner experience design research. But I think that the most important thing is really that we need to start thinking of ourselves as learner experience designers. So with that, if you want to follow up with me, we have got a blog, like I said, Twitter, Facebook. You can connect with me, and you can also just connect with me. And if you're doing any work on this, we're always looking for guest bloggers, or if you're interested in doing some more work on this, I'm always happy to talk to people about it, because it's something that I've gotten really excited about, and that's really gotten me excited about learning and education again. All right, so with that, I'm happy to take some questions, if I may still do that, Shane.
Hey, Joyce. Yeah, that'll be fine. I'll just say on behalf of everyone, just thank you for that presentation. And then, yeah, look, if people want to hang around for a few minutes and ask questions, that would be great. Thanks, Joyce.
Should Moodle have collaborative functionality along the same lines? You mean like Slack and appear in? Yeah, I would love for it to work more like Slack, but at the same time, I'm kind of with people who say that our LMSs. Should we really be building everything into the LMS, or should the LMS really be a way that should the LMS really be a place where things actually come together and we use APIs in order to connect it all? And I certainly think that if the LMSs are always being required to be the new Facebook, be the new Slack, every single time something new comes around the corner, I think they're always going to be playing catch up. So I think it's better if we can actually just integrate things. But again, we have to design across the gaps. And if we are going to make people use, if we are going to ask our learners to use different platforms, then we need to design so that becomes a good emotional experience. Can you explain more what you meant with step away from the LMS when developing a course? How do you avoid going outside what the LMS is capable of? So how do you avoid going outside what the LMS is capable of? Well, I think there are many. I think actually stepping away from the LMS is what allows us to think about the LMS differently, and think about the kind of experience that we actually want to create. And then when you have to go back in, and then you find that, this particular activity that we have designed actually won't work in Moodle quite the way that we wanted it to, at least you know what it is that you're aiming for, and you will still be stretching towards it. I think that's probably my biggest problem with people only designing inside the LMS, which is that what then happens is you don't stretch yourself. You just go for it's kind of like going into PowerPoint, you fire it up, and immediately it's offering you this standard slide where you just put in the heading and here's 3 bullet points. And what happens with that is that you are then prompted to do that. You're not prompted to actually stretch. But I think that when you actually design away from the LMS, you are designing the experience first. You're very clear about what it is that you want your learners to experience. Then you bring it back and you see within your constraints how you can still stretch for that experience. I'm not sure that I've articulated that well. And people saying that they would like Moodle to focus more on collaborative tools and the ability for more reflective practice. Again, I think that's, yeah, I totally agree. And thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so I totally agree. I think those are the kinds of things that we design for. And if we design for those, then it doesn't matter whether they happen inside Moodle or whether you set them up in Moodle, but students are actually doing them in Google, because if you design for people to be moving between different platforms, then that's okay. And if you're very clear that what you want them to do is to do a particular collaborative activity, then if you find that you can't do it within the LMS, then you're going to look for an alternative place to do that. Whereas if you're saying we're only going to design with what we've already got, then you're really bringing it back down to very basics. All right, Shane, thanks so much. I think I'll leave it there so that people have got time to actually go and move into the next sessions. I've put the slides up on SlideShare and I dropped them into the Twitter stream, so you can find them there. And sorry for my initial muddle. It did take me a little bit of time to get going, but I'm happy to talk more to people, and yeah, get in touch if you're thinking about some guest blogging too. All right, thanks everyone.